All right, welcome everybody. We're glad to have you here today, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. It's nice to having you join us here for our session today together with ChronosHub, and I'll introduce Martin here in one moment. But the goal for today is a little bit different than if you've been to some of our previous events. In general, we're doing educational events to help scholars with publishing their research. Today, we're going to check out a really cool tool that was built out by ChronosHub to find the right journal for your research, or make a short list of journals for your research. And the goal today is that you'll actually come away with a short list of potential journals to publish in your field. And I have to say that just a short anecdote before we start is I was fairly confident that I had done homework on all of the journal finder tools out there, and I had sort of given up because I was not impressed with any of them, found them to be hard to use, didn't really give relevant results, and to the point where I was almost considering even thinking about building a business to make a good one myself, until I finally came across ChronosHub and realized that there was finally one that was doing, that the user experience was great. It provided really good results and also gave really valuable information such as impact factor, APC charges, et cetera. So I will let Martin, kind of present ChronosHub Journal Finder at length here momentarily and do a demo. But really the goal is come ready with your research in mind about what you're kind of working on now, if you haven't yet chosen a journal that you want to publish to, because I really want everyone to be able to leave today with 2 or 3 possibilities. And then following Martin, I will give a short overview on once you have that short list of journals, how do you prioritize them? How do you make the right decisions about which ones to be sending off to in what order? Just a quickly about academic language experts, for those who aren't familiar, we help scholars with both language as well as publication support throughout the entire publishing process. So if you do have an article, or you have a book, or you have a grant proposal that you're trying to get out there, you're trying to get published, you're trying to get funding, don't hesitate to be in touch because we're happy to help. So with no further ado, Martin, thank you so much for joining me today. It's lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you a lot, Avi, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and introducing the ChronosHub Journal Finder to all of you. Hopefully, I'll be able to live up to those expectations of the best journal finder tool out there. Yeah, we'll have a closer look at the tool, of course. But I also wanted to give you a little bit of context and overview. So first, I'll give you just a very quick introduction to ChronosHub for you that are not so familiar with us already. And then we'll have a quick look at the context, which is very much about open access, but focus most of the time in a live demo of the journal finder. And we'll also have a look at the journal finder from a few different perspectives and angles. And in the end, I'm sure we'll have ample time for questions and answers, and maybe if someone wants to try it out interactively, then we can definitely do that there. But please do not hesitate to put in any questions in the chat during the session as well, and then we can always go back to those questions in the end. So hopefully that sounds fine with everyone. All right. So first of all, so who are we? Very, very briefly, ChronosHub is the name both on the platform that we're providing, and it's also the name of the company. And the platform is, at least what we want to be and claim, the world's leading platform for automating the publishing workflow and really enabling you to manage all types of open access. So here is the first glimpse of the platform, what it looks like when you're logged in as a researcher. And we'll of course have a look at the platform and the journal finder soon in more detail. And as a company, the headquarters are in central Copenhagen in Denmark, but it's quite a global company. Most users, though, are across Europe and the US, and then more and more in other parts of the world. where authors use the platform for processing their articles in various ways for different types of open access, whether that is paying for article processing charges or other open access fees, or if it is to process the articles through publishers with license agreements, or it may be as part of reusing data for green open access and automating repository deposits, or as part of different kinds of agreements. Right, so that's ChronosHub in a nutshell. And if we then turn our view to the context, I think hopefully, we all agree that open access is generally a good thing. But as you all know, open access also leads to a lot of different challenges for all of us in the research ecosystem. So if we look at funders, there are, as you know, more and more funders having different kinds of policies that drive publishing preferences, right? So in Europe, we have Plan S, a lot of sort of funders that have a Plan S policy, other funders that have a slightly different policy. We also see more recently in the US the OSTP memo, where all federal funded research in the US also has to have some kind of public access. So this puts more and more pressure on you as researchers to know where to publish to stay compliant with these different policies. It becomes more and more complex to really know when you look at your favorite journals or exploring new journals. But these policies are also complicated for the publishers. They all serve to transition from the traditional subscription-based model to some kind of open access model. But publishers want to preserve their revenue, of course, so they develop a lot of new business models. So open access is not just one model, as you know, it's a lot of different ways of how to deal with open access. So we have a green and hybrid and gold, but also 26 other variants of open access mechanisms, right? So that makes it immensely difficult for institutions. They have all kinds of transformative agreements, sometimes called read and publish, others are publish and read, some are with quotas, others with discounts, some with country waivers and so forth. And this complexity and variety means that institutions have to carry out a lot of manual work going into a lot of publisher dashboards and systems, or discuss that with them over email to try to figure out which articles to pay for, which ones that are covered by an agreement and which not. So that's terrible, but it's even worse from our point of view for you as researchers, right? Most of the burden end up on your table, on your shoulders, to figure out if this publishing venue is compliant or not with the policy. Then you have to fill in these huge forms, as you know, to submit to the publishers. Similar huge forms to report back on the outputs from your grants. And then typically your institution also asks you to manually populate their repository, or as we call it in Europe, a CRIS system, or research management system in North America. So this is not really a great situation for anyone, right? We have a very fragmented system. It's difficult with analysis and reports, but primarily a lot of manual work to fill in the same information over and over again from scratch. So this is the perspective that we have, regardless if we work with funders, publishers, or institutions, right? So these are examples of organizations using the ChronosHub platform. And regardless of perspective here, we always try to put you as authors first. That doesn't mean that we always succeed, but we're at least trying. So we're trying to listen to you a lot. And that's why these sessions like today, we're also very keen to get your input and comments and feedback so that we can see how we can further improve the services for you. But basically what we're trying to ensure is to facilitate this whole author journey. So facilitate and automate whatever is possible. So we'll have a look at the journal finder that's typically used here before you submit your manuscript to a publisher. But upon acceptance of your article, we don't want you to worry about any kinds of open access fees. So we try to automate that whole handling and facilitate that so you don't have to bother. and also not so that the institution has to bother. We can automate data collection, funding eligibility checks and approvals, and we even take care of all kinds of payments on the institution's behalf. We also gather all the data on the institution's agreements and the articles covered by those agreements. So it's possible for the institution to do reporting across all agreements in one place, again, without bothering you as researchers. And then we also try to reuse the data in terms of your full texts, so we can automate repository deposits and unburden you also with that specific task. Right, so that is in short what we're trying to achieve. And today we'll focus really on the journal finder. And if you want to find out more about the other modules, if you're from a library or a research office, then don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of my colleagues, and we're happy to walk you through those as well. All right, so hopefully that's understandable as an overall introduction. And we'll now go into the journal finder. So the journal finder, the ChronosHub journal finder, you can actually find in a lot of different shapes and forms, and I'll show you a few different examples so you can see a little bit what's similar and what's not so similar. So you can, in collaboration with academic language experts, you can go to this URL yourselves. So this is publicly available. I don't know if Avi, if you put that link into the chat, then you can all explore what we call the journal finder beta by yourselves. And we'll later have a look at what it looks like for institutions and also publishers when you come across the journal finder there. But basically, this journal finder enables you to, on the one hand side, simply check certain aspects for your favorite journals. Very often, specifically, senior researchers already know where you want to get published. So you can simply look that up by typing something as part of the title. Let's say we take biochemistry as an example, then you will see already a shorter list of any titles, including biochemistry. We'll have a closer look at this later. But if you don't know exactly where you want to get published, well, you also have the possibility to filter on specific subject areas. Or if you want to limit it to only journals that are indexed in a specific database or list like Scopus or Web of Science, then you can do that here. Or you may have a favorite publisher, or you want to limit the journals to specific open access aspects. For example, only journals that are gold OA, or if they should have a specific embargo period, or you have a maximum sort of funding for your APC. So if we take an example here of, let's see, something that is not typically so well covered, right? Because we see that this list has 46,000 journals. If we go into arts and humanities, and then we'll pick, let's say, religious studies, we see that this list is reduced to 457 journals. So we can see a lot of journals in the list still. And what you may want to be aware of is that these subject areas you may be familiar with already. This is the same subject areas you find in Scopus. So you'll recognize them there. But that also means that from the 46,000 journals, only the 28,000 journals that are in Scopus can be found when you filter on them in this list or in these different subject areas. So if we instead search for religious, then in the same way as we did with biochemistry, you can see a list of journals, including that in the title. But if we just search for religious, well, we see that we already got a little bit more matches, because now we search through the keywords not only in the title, but also in subject areas. And as you see here, also in the description of those journals. So that enables us to get a way to find journals that are matching our areas of research in one way or the other. And then the main aspects of the journal finder are really looking at different aspects of open access. And that means that you can select now a funder. So let's say we select a national funder like the Swiss National Science Foundation. Then we can directly see here let's see if that's a good example. Yeah, I'll switch just to another view here so we can see it a little bit better. I'll do that here. A little bit easier to read, I think. Right, so we now see for any of the journal titles directly, if they're compliant with that funder's policy that we selected, or if they are not compliant. So if we scroll down this list, we see that most of these journals offer a compliant publishing option. I think there is something down here somewhere. Most of them are compliant. Okay, maybe we'll come across that later. Or we'll just search for religious again. Yeah, okay, here we go. So we see now an example of a journal title where it's not compliant, right? So we're trying to make this compliance aspect as clear as possible for each individual journal title. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that we also want to look at the funding. So let's say that we are from the University of Lausanne. Then we can, again, directly for each journal title, see if there is an agreement that is covering our article processing charges. So we see here the APCs for publishing in this journal, if we are from University of Lausanne, are covered. And so we don't have to worry about the payments and we don't have to worry about funding compliance, right? So if we are interested in this journal, well, we are, can go ahead worrying free. And we know that we'll stay compliant and we don't have to worry about any APC charges in that sense. Right, so hopefully that makes sense and is understandable for everyone. And if we want to have a little bit sort of a look at what this journal finder can look like when you're maybe co-authoring with institutions that are already on ChronosHub, or if you have a grant from any of the funders on the platform or publishers that are on the platform, then it may look a little bit different, right? So if we, again, take University of Lausanne as an example, well, they are also on the platform. So they have their own sort of design of the journal finder. They also call it something different, journal compliance tool in this case. But you see that they have always the same number of journals, right? So it's the same journals, but we have potentially other filters here on the side. And when you have your own institutional journal finder, well, we also take into account if you have this as an institution, a central APC fund or central open access fund. So you can see if you can get any APCs covered through that central funding. So that takes into account the specific criteria that the institution may have for funding those APCs. So we see that UNIL, or University of Lausanne in this case, they're paying only if it's a gold open access journal, and we see this is a gold journal. And they are only paying if the APC is lower than 2,500 Swiss franc, as in this example. So that's one example. Another example is here, University of Copenhagen. We see they call it the journal finder. They have slightly different colors and logos, of course, but again, the same number of journals. They have slightly different filters because in Denmark, they have a specific list of journals called the Bibliometric Research Indicator list. So that's part of their national assessment. So you can filter on those so that you're certain that you select journals that are giving you a good score in that kind of national assessment in that example. So in a similar way, institutions may choose to include different kinds of journal metrics, as Avi mentioned. For the specific journal impact factors, well, then that can only be accessible for the journal finder when you're logged in. We cannot show them publicly, but otherwise it's used in that way. Others include filters for helping you as researchers to steer away from predatory publishers. So that's another potential filter here. So hopefully it's understandable that it can look a little bit different if your institution is using the journal finder. So if you think this is useful, then please talk to your library, and then they can quite easily sort of opt in to get their own institutional journal finder in that sense. But you may also come across the ChronosHub Journal Finder when you want to go and publish with certain publishers on the platform. So here we see an example for IOP. They have slightly different filters. And in this case, they only include their own journals, right? So that's the biggest difference. For each journal, otherwise you have similar information, what type of open access options you have, what the APCs are. You also have potentially different information here, as you see here. The accepted version does not cost you anything, of course, to reuse in a repository. You may also see that some here are closed access journals. It's not only for open access, of course. They also have some partner journals in here. And once you found a journal, well, then that takes you directly to that journal's submission page, right? So that's where you can log in or create an account and then start the submission process. For institutions that are on the platform, we also support this submission process, but that's maybe time for another session. Right. And then here is another example for ACS, but you see it's very similar, where you can also just indicate the name of your institution, say Twente. And where's that Twente? Save and update the search. And for each individual journal title, in the same way as before, you may see if there is an agreement covering any costs and similar, or giving you a discount. So in summary, if we go back here, the journal finder is there to hopefully help you in assessing journals that are already your favorite journals where you want to get submitted out of different open access perspectives, or explore it in terms of finding potentially relevant journals as part of different subject areas, or in combination with the journals being indexed in certain databases or having specific open access aspects. Right. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense to everyone, how it works with checking for funding policy compliance, making it clear if you have to pay those 1,300 in APCs, or if it's covered by an agreement, or potentially your university's open access fund, and how you can then proceed with the journey and go to the submission. So if you want to find out more, and specifically if you're from a library or research office, then we're happy to give you a live demo also of how other institutions address these typical open access challenges, and also for the other types in terms of APCs and agreements and repository deposits. And we also provide a free SWOT analysis of current open access management practices for the institution. So if you are interested in that, then maybe make a screenshot or type in this link to just book a meeting. But we also provide as a free resource for any researcher or library, an open access guide. So if you want to, you can go to this link, chronoshub.io/open access guide. So we carried out a webinar series specifically for researchers. So that's a free resource where you can see those webinars, and you can download this open access guide that helps you to explain all those different concepts. And there's also an open access glossary, so you can look up APCs and hybrid and transformative agreement or whatever you may be stumbling across, and hopefully get a clear definition and explanation of that specific open access terminology. Right, and if you have any other questions, then don't hesitate to contact me or any of these specific colleagues. Right, so hopefully that provides you with an overview, and over to you, Avi.
Brilliant, thanks, Martin. That's really interesting and informative. And the truth is, I myself wasn't even familiar with all of the features, and probably still not familiar with all the features that ChronosHub has to offer. So I'm always impressed. So I wanna do two things at this point. Number one is I want to offer anyone who wants to ask any questions is welcome to do so. And then maybe I don't know if anyone wants to do this, but if they would like, if someone wants to, share their screen and do a quick check for themselves, maybe, if they have any questions, you can guide them and they can kind of do it live. So I'll just give everyone, 10 seconds here. If you do want to, we're a small enough forum today that you're welcome to just open up your microphone and ask. You're also welcome to write your question in the chat. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to think about that. All right, so obviously everyone is welcome to use the journal finder on their own, the tool on their own. It's free and it's a really powerful tool. If you do have any questions at any point for Martin and myself, please do go ahead and ask. So if there is no one who has any specific questions or wants to do a live demo for their own research, what I'll do is I will continue things here and share my screen. And
excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I don't want to share my screen. Is it okay?
That's fine.
Okay. So.
You want me to?
내가 마이크에 대요?
Wait, sorry, Cohen. Please mute yourself. One moment, please. Okay, sorry. Who was asking? Who wanted to share their screen? I didn't catch that.
뭐라고요? 지금 내가 말할까요?
Cohen, please mute yourself. Thank you. I couldn't. Did you catch that, Martin? Who was asking to share the screen?
I think it was G.
여기서 말하면은
All right.
So
yeah.
the person who is not really famous worldwide.
Sorry, go ahead.
Like for the person who is not really famous worldwide, like to be famous worldwide, what is the best solution?
To be famous, I don't know. If I had the solution for that, I would be retired and but I assume you mean well known in terms of your research. Is that your question? Obviously being well known for your research is a combination of a number of different things, and you're going to want to first and foremost build your reputation as a scholar who's who has really solid foundational research in your field. I don't think there's any shortcuts to becoming well known, but aside from that, I think it's really important to be active in the forums that research is happening. So you want to make sure that if there are online listservs or if there are LinkedIn discussions that are happening, you're contributing your opinion and you're also sharing your research. That could also be true for websites such as ResearchGate or Academia. Make sure that people, not just that you do your research, but that people know about it. So that would be my suggestion if I understood the question correctly.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I can maybe comment a little bit on that as well. I mean, we work a lot closely with researchers to see how can we provide a tool and guidance in the direction of selecting the most relevant journals for you. And so the question is, of course, what is the definition of the most relevant journal? Because there are a lot of different driving forces. One may be to increase your reputation. From an institutional perspective, very often the institutions want to climb the university rankings. It is very dependent on the country's or the institution's research performance assessment. How do they assess you as a researcher? When do they say you have a good performance, and when is the performance not so good? And traditionally, that has very much been about the journal impact factors. So the more you publish in journals that have a high impact factor, the better it looks on your CV. But there is, of course, a global trend now going away from that, trying to go away from that kind of way of evaluating researchers and finding more objective ways to measure your performance. But citations of your articles is or remains very important. So there are a lot of studies that show that that compare the subscription journals or closed access journals, the ones that are behind a paywall, with open access journals, and it is there seems to be clear evidence that open access journals do have higher citation rates. So this is sort of reinforcing the path of maybe you want to really look at open access channels to increase the chances of getting your work cited, right? Because of course, if your article has been published in an open access channel, that becomes available to many more researchers worldwide than if it's behind a paywall, and hence increasing chances that someone will cite your work when they publish their research. And that's why we see in this journal finder a lot of different journal metrics and filters, right? Because some institutions say, well, for us, it's super important that the journal is indexed in this or that list, right? The fact that the journal has been indexed in Scopus is kind of a quality check, because in order to get indexed in Scopus, you have to fulfill a number of criteria as a journal, right? And hence, that's also what a lot of the university rankings are looking at. They're limiting all the articles that they look at to the ones that are indexed in, for example, Scopus or Web of Science and other places, right? So that's sort of one aspect of it. But then there are a lot of aspects for finding the right and relevant journal for you that our journal finder does not meet. So I also want to make that clear, right? Very often researchers look at their peers and where they publish. So where are the most famous or reputable researchers in your field publishing? So you may want to look through Google Scholar or different databases like Lens or Dimensions or Scopus or Web of Science to see in different fields or for specific subject areas, who are the researchers that are standing out in that context, and where are they publishing their work, right? And another is more semantically linked. So things that we are starting to look into together with publishers is to simply scan your full text, or at least the abstract, and suggest journals that are matching the content of your research. So we're just at the beginning of that journey. So the journal finder today does not support it, but that's a direction of travel that we'll probably see more of in the future.
Thanks, Martin. That's really helpful. Any other questions? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start my part of the presentation. But if anyone does have any further questions for myself or Martin at any point, don't hesitate to ask. All right. So we're going to get started here. And like I said, we're going to be talking about, how it is that after you do make your list, hopefully using the ChronosHub tool, or maybe you already have a list of potential journals to publish your research in, how do you go about actually making the decision about where to submit, at least first, first, second, third, fourth, etc. And by the way, I do recommend that you do take the time to actually make a, prioritize which one it comes first or second, because that way, as soon as if you do get a rejection, you can go ahead and submit right away. So it's always good to have a few backup plans ready. Anyone who, here are some contact information if anyone wants to be in touch. Okay, so the first principle that I say for choosing a journal for publication is you really need to do your homework, and you need to spend some time to actually look into the different options that are available to you once you have your your short list. And there's no one single factor or one single area which is going to be most important for everyone. For some people, impact factor is going to be the most important. For some people, how quick is it going to be most important. And it's what's really most, and it really is important that you decide for yourself exactly which criteria is going to be most important and least important. But what I do say very firmly is that the first thing you should be looking for is the right match for your article. You're going to want to make sure that where you're submitting to really has a deep interest in your field, or that another way to say it is your research is actually engaging in an active way with the research in the field, with the other scholars. You're continuing a conversation that's already been started. Maybe you're pointing out a gap in the research or something that is missing that you would actually want to be able to address, but it's within research that's already been published. And if that research has already been published in the journal that you're going to publish in, that could be even better. That can even really help you. So how do you go about doing that? Two things I would suggest. First of all, every journal has what's called its aims and scope. Okay, so that means that's the place where the journal defines for itself, what am I interested in? What do I want to receive? What should scholars be turning to us if they're in specific fields? So that's number one. Number two is you're going to want to look back and you're going to want to say to yourself, what has this journal published in the last 3 years? What's their interest? What do they want to learn about? And as soon as you hear that, as soon as you go back and read some of the abstracts that have been published previously, then you can go back and say, okay, well, what I'm doing now relates to 2 or 3 of the articles that have been published recently in this journal. Therefore, I have a good chance. Or if on the flip side, if you are doing your homework and you see, well, none of these topics really relate to what I'm doing, then even if the title of the journal sounds appealing or interesting, or maybe you got a recommendation from a colleague or a friend, or maybe it's high impact, it still might not be the right fit for you. So that's really important to keep in mind. Now, number two is after you find the things that are the right match, impact factor in most countries is going to be an important key factor. Now, Martin mentioned, and this is definitely true, there are definitely discussions about alternative ways and forms to judge the quality of research. And I think there's a lot of problems with impact factor. We won't get into that today. But it still is the way that many researchers are judged and evaluated on their research. And it's something that I don't think we can ignore. So keep in mind, if your promotion or if your university is going to be looking at the impact factor of your journals, you're going to want to keep that in mind from an early stage. There are different ways of quantifying it. There's the number system. There's also, Q1, Q2. It's divided into quarters, where Q1 are the kind of top quarter of journals, whereas Q4 are the lower tier. And I've had universities who have, representatives and research heads who have told me that, they're really kind of pushing all of their researchers to publish in Q1, Q2. I don't know if that's right or not right. That's for them to decide, but it is important to understand what your university is expecting from you. Now, number three is something that I don't think most of us check, but I think is really important. And that is acceptance percentage. That means how many articles or how many submissions is the journal receiving on an annual basis every year? And then out of those, how many are they publishing? Now, why does that matter to me? How many, all the other articles? Well, very simply, we want to increase the chances that our article is going to get accepted. So if one journal gets 100 submissions a year and the other one gets 500, but they're both publishing only 10 articles. So the one that's only gets 100 a year, well, you'll have a higher chance of having your article accepted there. as opposed to the one that only accepts that has 500 submissions and only accepts 10 articles. Now, you may think, well, if they're rejecting more articles, they are a better journal. And there is some truth to that. And that's why I brought this graph as, in general terms. That's why I brought this graph on the right-hand side of the screen. It shows you the correlation between acceptance percentage and the impact factor, right? Or really it's showing the opposite. It's what percentage of articles are rejected and what is the impact factor. So as you can see here, there definitely, as they reject more articles, there is, some correlation with a higher impact factor, but it's not entire. And there are plenty of articles or plenty of journals that do not have a terribly high rejection rate and yet still have a high impact factor. So it's important to look at both of those criteria separately. Look both at what the impact factor is and how many articles they're accepting or rejecting at one given time. Now, some journal websites will tell you how many articles they're accepting or rejecting. Some will not. Some will kind of keep that as a secret. So that might be something you need to do some digging in order to decide. Now, another important factor, which I think is especially important for early career researchers, but even for more senior researchers, is the speed of response time. How long does it take them to respond to you? Now, you might not know this ahead of time, but there may be journals that say, I've seen journals even now that say they're still backed up from Corona, and and it's going to take them a while to get back to you. Well, that's fine, but do you have that time to spare? Can you afford it? And I think that the journals that are getting better at reducing the time to publication and reducing the time to giving you an answer are telling their scholars are doing a better job over time to tell their scholars it's going to take approximately 5 weeks, going to take approximately 10 weeks. And I think that's really important to kind of have some idea of how long it's going to take them to get back to you. And if you don't know, you can ask them. You can say, generally, how long does it take you, to get back with a response to the article. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up is the length of the article. And this is something that seems maybe trivial, but it's actually quite important. And the reason I bring this up is because I see a lot of examples of scholars who come to us for translation help, for editing help, for formatting help. And I see that their articles are way too long. Almost never they're way too short, but they're almost always way too long for the journal. And it's really important that you don't waste your time submitting to a journal where it's going to be so long that they're not going to take a look at it, even if it is really important research. So these are just some of the factors that I encourage people to look at before they make a decision about how to choose which journal to start with, is looking at these 5 factors. So I think that you can probably within 10, 15 minutes look at the research that you're working on now. Think about the potential journals that it could be, use ChronosHub as a help, and then, kind of make a list of priorities in terms of 1 to 5 of what's most important to you. Now, I do want to quickly just talk about some of the problems with impact factor. I don't want to get into too long of a discussion about this, but I think it's important to bring up because impact factor is kind of the gold standard now for how we judge papers, but there are some issues. So what are some of the issues that have come up with the impact factor system? So first of all, the impact factor judges the quantity of citations in other peer-reviewed journals and uses that as an indication of the quality of that journal. It isn't necessarily indicative of the quality of that particular article, but the assumption is that if you can publish in high impact factor journals, then you must be doing a good job. Now, the issue is that a quantity of citations doesn't actually necessarily equal a quality of a paper, meaning in theory, yes, if you're quoted a lot, or if your journal is quoted a lot, it's having an impact. But that could be because you're in a field that there's a lot of research being done. That can also be because they're quoting this journal because they're taking issue with it. So that's issue number 1, is that quantity of citations doesn't necessarily equal the quality of the paper. Number 2 is that the impact factor metric was set up in order to judge the journal, not to judge the individual, but it's become an individual gauge. It's become a way that we check it. And so if you get an article into a journal, maybe it's not such a great, maybe the impact factor isn't so high. That's not an indication of how successful your or or new or novel your research is. Could be really important and really successful, but it just didn't make it into a really high impact factor journal. Another issue is that it encourages what are known as citation swaps. So I'll quote you if you quote me, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And it's a, kind of a trading citations with colleagues or with friends, and, leads to kind of really, in my eyes, quite problematic, kind of things that happen, between the lines that don't really reflect the actual quality of the research. It doesn't necessarily, an impact factor doesn't necessarily judge broader impact, right? It may judge like how many times it's quoted in academic papers, but what about beyond the academic? In Corona, for example, we obviously wanted papers that were going to be, and research that was going to be high impact right away, not just what's going to be quoted the next 3 years, but what's going to help save lives tomorrow. So that's really important. Something that I saw recently, which I thought was interesting, is that it can be influenced by a small number of papers. So this is the graph that I brought on the right-hand side, is that, a few really high quoted papers can influence the rest of the journal. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single article in the journal is of the same worth. So those are just some of the issues with impact factor you might want to consider. So there are alternative methods for evaluation. And sort of assessing the quality of any particular journal. So you're probably familiar with the H index, which measures the productivity and citation impact together. So it's not just how many times you're cited, but it's also productivity. This was adopted by Google. So if you come, in Google Scholar, you'll see the H index. And this can be kind of another way to. It is correlated with citation. With impact factor, but it's not necessarily exactly the same. And then also important to know is altmetrics. And altmetrics is something that's been on the rise for the last couple of years. And that's a way of measuring other ways that your research may have impact, such as social media, online news coverage, and online reference managers. And these are ways of saying, okay, how do we see what impact the research has beyond just impact factor in other ways as well? And if part of your goal is to impact policy, or is to impact public opinion, or is to impact government, you may want to think about the altmetrics. You may want to think about, well, how much is this getting quoted not only in other journals, but also, on social media or in other influential publications that are important to me. Now, one of the things, I think the elephant in the room, and I think that, ChronosHub does a great job of making this transparent of what costs are. And especially now that we're in the interim period of open access, where, sometimes authors are paying, sometimes universities are paying, sometimes it's unclear. It's really kind of important to understand, what we're getting into with open access. And I think that for some scholars, it's a source of frustration because their universities may not be ready to kind of like help them with the open access, or maybe they have the funding, but it's not really getting to the right places. So, open access can really range, anywhere from a couple $100 to thousands and thousands of dollars. And it really depends on the individual journal, the individual publisher, and what that is going to look like, whether it's fully open access or hybrid. We're not going to get into all these questions today, but it's important when you're picking the journal to pick realistically. If it's an open access journal and it's starting at, $5,000 and your entire budget for the year is $3,000, so that might be a challenge, right? You might need to look for other sources of funding. Hopefully you don't need to give up on the journal, itself just because of a funding issue. And I will tell you, and Martin could probably share more about this. You can often ask for a waiver, and sometimes journals will actually waive at least part of the open access fee in order. Sorry about that. I'll start back in the beginning. In order to get your research into their journal if they really think that it's of high quality, especially if you're from an area or a location where it's hard to get funding for publication or for open access. Doing, like I said in the beginning, doing your homework and preparing is really, really important and really critical for making sure that you're ready to find the right thing. So if you want to find impact factor, you can go there. There's some links here to try and find the impact factor for your journal. The journal itself will hopefully tell you, or it will be on their website, but it's good to have one place. Also, impact factor is on the journal finder that on ChronosHub. So it's as simple as that. And I realize now, Martin, that I have to add ChronosHub, in fact, to make it the main one. This was an old presentation before I knew about you guys. So this has got to be updated. Acceptance percentage, you can find some rates for that online. And also what I really like is there's a wiki for experience sharing. So this is just scholars coming in and saying, have you tried to publish in this journal? Well, I had a great experience, or I had a terrible experience, or the editor was amazing and helped me through, or the editor ignored me and was rude. And that's really helpful, because if you search for your journal, you may get some feedback, and or the journal that you're considering submitting to, you may get some valuable feedback, which helps save you time over the long run. And before we finish up here, I want to share a few particularly creative ideas that I've heard over the years, which I don't necessarily recommend in every case, but are worth considering to shorten your time to publication. The first one is reaching out to the journal, or reaching out to the local, right? Someone that you know, someone on the board, someone that you've been in touch with at a conference, or someone that you're connected to, and asking them, if they think it's going to be of interest to their journal. The second one is rejection as a strategy. And what I mean by that is, if there's a journal that it's going to, most likely you're going to get rejected, but you're going to get really great feedback in a short amount of time, sometimes it's worth submitting there just to get some feedback and to get some impressions about your research. Like I said, I don't like the idea of you scratch my back, I scratch yours, but it is important to keep the journal editors in mind and make sure that if you're engaging with their research, not that you're just demonstrating it favorably, but that you actually engage seriously with their research and don't ignore it, because they'll take issue with that. Pay attention to calls for papers. If you're a research authority, or if you yourself are part of fora where there are calls for papers, you may see, a journal wants to receive submissions on X or Y topic. This is a really great opportunity for you to kind of get something very specific in. And generally, from my experience, there's less competition around those particular papers. So that's a really great way of kind of, maybe taking a shortcut to publication. I have one scholar who all she does is answer calls for papers, and she's very successful with the research that she submits. And last but not least, choose a topic that's relevant. Now, obviously, I'm not asking you, I don't think that we should look in the news and choose our research topics, but I do think if there's a way to connect what you're working on to something that's, in the headlines, or something that's important, or something that's relevant, to people beyond just the individual journal. Let's not forget, the journal, in the end of the day, does want to sell subscriptions. They do want to have people reading their work. They do want downloads. So the more it's relevant, the more chance it's going to be published. So that kind of is just very quickly some of what I've seen from the field, some best tips and practices for how to really, ensure that you're submitting your research to the best publisher possible for you, not, best objectively, but in your particular case. And that brings me to the end of what my session. I see Magdala has her hand raised, so please go ahead and and feel free to open up your microphone and share.
Good morning. It's actually 9 a.m. where I am. So
yes,
good afternoon to all of you. So I had several questions. The first one is, can you email the editor and ask about response time? Because, so first I should just introduce myself. I'm in the field of medical humanities, but in French and Italian. So, and I am in the United States. Publishing here is, for lack of another way to say it, vicious, especially for the humanities. There's a lot of gatekeeping. So that being said, can you ask journals for their response time if it's not already stated on their, on their site, where they say for authors, right? How you submit, the length of the article, the format, and so forth. Some will list it, others will not. And so you have no idea when you send an article for consideration.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to ask is, this is not something that is practiced, but I feel it should be, because it is in book publishing. So to respond to rejections, because, they will give you, sometimes they'll share with you the reviewer's feedback, which is complete, it can be off the mark, because that reviewer is not in your field. That reviewer doesn't have an interdisciplinary, background to engage with your research, nor the language, right? So these are all these are things that I'm encountering. So the quickest questions are, can you ask for how long the response time is? And can you respond to a rejection?
Yeah, really good questions. Martin, do you want to take those first, and then I'll add anything that I think of?
Yeah, well, I think this is indeed more your area of expertise, Avi.
Fine, so I'll start off, and then we'll do the play. No problem.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you. So here's what I would say. I think the answer to both questions is the same. Don't forget that the publishers are going to try and push you into their workflow forms. Okay, I know those are, what does that mean? It means that it's easiest for them when you go onto the website, you submit it through their form, and it goes into their workflow. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and you should do that. But don't forget that the editors are people on the other side of the fence, and they appreciate thoughtful and conscientious people just like you appreciate when they are thoughtful back to you. So would I write them an email and say, how long is it going to take for you to respond to me? No, I wouldn't. Would I write an email that says, hi, my name is XYZ. I just submitted via the online submission form. I just wanted to confirm and make sure that it got through. Here's one line about my research and who I am. Thank you so much for your time. If you have an estimate of how long, it generally takes to get some sort of a response, I would greatly appreciate it. If you take that approach, I see no reason not to ask. It's personable, it's kind, it's thanking them and appreciating their time and effort. I think where people get annoyed is when there's a sort of expectation from authors of like, I need a response like right away, like you owe me a response. A lot of these editors, some of them are voluntary, even the ones that aren't voluntary are doing it alongside a lot of other responsibilities they have. So, being, polite and thoughtful to them is very important. Now, in terms of the second question about, kind of how do you respond to a problematic, to let's say what you deem a problematic review. So there are different kinds. Sometimes there's a review where you just like disagree with one of the reviewers, but agree with another one of the reviewers. And in that case, you might want to—
If I might interrupt for a second.
Yeah, please.
With this particular, I should be a little bit more detailed about the incident that is prompting this question for me. To take a bit of reverse. Yes, being polite and saying, I just want to know generally what is the timeline for response from your journal. That it doesn't have necessarily to do with me particularly, just for me to have an idea of where I put that article into the ether, and just move on until whatever process happens. Now, I submitted an article to a journal, and they had only one reviewer read it. And the rejection letter, they said they were pressed to find people who had the expertise to read it. Okay. And the reviewer doesn't from their comments, first of all, a lot of them were just personal choices, as in, if you have woman in the title, perhaps you should put in the abstract that you're doing gender studies. No, I'm not, right? So this sort of like banal, but just superficial comments, and the reviewer could not engage with the article in any depth whatsoever, and they do not read French.
Yeah.
And I provided the translations, and yet for them that was even problematic. So this is a journal where everything is published in English. I translated everything and put the French in the notes, just so that people would know there was an original.
Yeah.
However, but again, they only had one reviewer, and the reviewer did not have the background in the interdisciplinary fields that I work in to be able to engage with the article. That being said, I know I chose the wrong journal at that point. But right?
I'll tell you the backstory here, although I don't want to, I can't know 100%, but I will tell you 99% chance of what happened here, because this is happening everywhere. The journals are desperate for reviewers. Reviewers don't want to review, and it's creating a big shortage of reviewers across a lot of journals. So you're probably in a situation where they did not reject you necessarily because your research was or was not good enough. They simply rejected you because they couldn't assess whether your research was good or not good enough. And the sign that that's true is that they assigned you someone who didn't know what your research was all about because they couldn't handle it. So what do you do? So A is you need to ask yourself, was this the right journal? right? Maybe you should be aiming it somewhere else. But B, and I really highly encourage everyone to do this, make a list of reviewers that you send to them that are suggested reviewers. Say, here are the people that I would send the paper to. Now, you might think, well, that's weird because it's supposed to be blind peer review and, you know, they're supposed to find the reviewers, not me. But I'm telling you the situation on the ground is that journals cannot find reviewers. So if you know people in your field that you think are going to look at your research positively and are, you know, and will understand it in depth, but are still not biased, right? Not someone who's sitting next door to you in your university, but someone who is a colleague from another university. Write to the journal as part of your submission and say, here are my suggested reviewers. Sometimes there'll even be a place in the submission form to suggest reviewers. That will cut your time, because the biggest problem for how long things take now is because of the review process and because it's hard for them to find reviewers. It's a problem across all disciplines in all journals. So it's not just you, but it sounds to me like this has nothing to do with the quality or lack of quality of your particular research.
Yes.
They just couldn't.
So I'm sorry to be like, you know, taking up so much time. I am a new assistant professor, so I'm a junior scholar in my field. And part of the article that I submitted, I presented at a conference in the, you know, so 19th century French. So I presented at a conference and it was really well received. So for me, could I then suggest people who attended the conference and made comments about the article?
Yeah, I don't see why
possible
not.
Reviewers. Like,
yeah,
I'm not sure how that would work, because in some of the forms they don't give you the space to put in suggested reviewers.
Right. So there may be well, there's okay. So two parts here. If someone's really kind of been part of the writing process and you've been sending, you know, back and forth, you know, versions of your article, I don't think that you should suggest them as a reviewer. But if someone just was at a conference and gave you a comment on your lecture, and then later you turn that into a paper, I don't think there's any problem with recommending them. I can't say that for sure. You might want to check, you know, the like ethics guidelines, but I can't imagine that would be an issue. So definitely. Now, in terms of where to do it, sometimes there is a place on the forum. Sometimes it's a matter of they have, like, you know, additional comments and you want to add them in there, or even in your email, you know, where you're asking about how long it's going to take. You can also ask them if they, you know, would appreciate having some names of reviewers that might be able to help take a look at the article. So that's important.
Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I truly appreciate it.
With pleasure. And if you have more questions, you can reach out to Martin or myself. Let's do one more last question. And I'm conscious of time. I don't want, you know, people to.
So sorry, but I have one more question. It's just my friend's question, actually. Like, one of my friends is here also, but like he can't speak like that great English, so I'm just asking instead. So like he has some papers, like he has some papers with specific topic about physics, like in Korea. And he has the copyrights with this topic, but he's not really known in Korean academia in physics. So like what he wants is to preventing like others from presenting the same topic with his paper, but he doesn't want the legal way because he thinks that it's going to be too complicated, like the lawsuit, all those kind of things. So yeah, he want to know like what would be the proper way the simpler way to prevent others from presenting the same topic that he has the copyright with.
Yeah, the first thing that I would recommend him to do is to upload what's called a preprint. And that's something that is really catching on and has become super popular in many fields. And essentially what a preprint has many functions, and we don't need to get into all of them today. But a preprint is a way to say, I'm not ready to publish this article yet, or it hasn't been accepted for publication yet. However, I want to reserve the copyright over it, and I want to make sure that it's attributed to me and that no one can steal my ideas. So there are different preprint servers depending on your fields that you can, you know, upload your paper to. It's just a depository where you can upload your paper, and then you have the, you know, rights over, and you have the copyright over that research that you've done. So I highly recommend for him to kind of think about in his field, take a look, you know, do some searching online, see what are the most accepted, you know, preprint servers, in his field and see if he can upload his paper there. And then as soon as that happens, it's a lot harder for someone else to take it. Now, obviously, it's a matter of if someone does rip it off, it's a matter of enforcement. And I'm definitely not an expert in law anywhere, for sure not in Korea. So I can't exactly tell you how he would go about enforcing that. But I think it's a really good start to and a good habit to get into.
Okay, so it's like preprint, like PREPRINT, exactly.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, pre-print.
Okay, great.
And before print.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you. Martin, was there anything you wanted to add on any of the questions, or are we good to go?
I think we're good to go. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Martin. Thank you to everyone who came today and participated, and to those who will be listening to the recording later on. Do feel free to reach out if you want to reach out to ChronosHub for a demo, or maybe refer them on to your administrators at your university or your library, because that can be really helpful. If anyone has any requests.
One last minute. So I was actually going to email my librarian liaison to ask about ChronosHub. What is the best link I provide them? Is that something you could put in the chat so I can cut and paste it?
Yes, I'm sure that Martin can arrange that for you. Not a problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Of course. Yeah. So, but if anyone wants to be in touch, there we go. If anyone wants to be in touch about translation, editing, if you're working on a book proposal, we can help you with your book. Grant proposals that you're submitting, do not hesitate. Don't be a stranger and be in touch. So thank you everyone for coming today. And yeah, let's stay in touch, and we'll be and pay attention to future events, because we've got more right around the corner. And yeah, happy holidays for everyone celebrating.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye now.
Bye-bye.